right, Chapter 8, Honesty and Conflicts of Interest. Principle 3D from the APTA Code of Ethics states that physical therapists shall not engage in conflicts of interest that interfere with professional judgment. And we can say, of course, physical therapist assistants shall also not engage in conflicts of interest that interfere with professional judgment. Your text starts with this case study on Brenda, who is this physical therapist who hires her nephew, newly graduated PT, and then ends up hiring his pregnant girlfriend also. And come to find out, the pregnant girlfriend, Kelly, ends up submitting some padded or false billing charges. And Patrick and Kelly get in a big, huge fight. Patrick takes the blame, goes to Brenda, says that he did it. And so, they find out, no, it indeed was Kelly who had access to all of the billing statements and cash pay patients. And what do you do in that situation? What do you do if you're Patrick? What do you do if you're Brenda? And talks about the potential ramifications or outcomes of that, especially since his girlfriend is pregnant, yes? So, these situations are sticky. I am a personal believer that honesty is always the best policy, but I guarantee you will find yourself in situations that you just might kind of go, wow, what do you do in this case? All right. Conflicts of interest are sometimes difficult to discern, especially when they involve self-interest that distorts good judgment. So conflicts of interest are situations in which individuals have interests that could, for the typical person, significantly threaten their role responsibilities. So we're going to talk about fee-for-service. We're going to talk about managed care. We're going to talk about POPTS, which are physician-owned therapy services. And we'll talk about accepting gifts. All right. Now, some standards for the PTA that talk about conflicts that are related to conflicts of interest. Check out from Appendix 2. You are going to want to look at Standard 2A. Physical therapist assistants shall act in the best interest of patients or clients over the interest of the PTA. Standard 3A, physical therapist assistants shall make objective decisions in the patient or client's best interest in all practice settings. Standard 4A, physical therapist assistants shall provide truthful, accurate, and relevant information and shall not make misleading representations. Standard 5A, physical therapist assistants shall comply with applicable local, state, and federal laws and regulations. And Standard 7, all of Standard 7 actually addresses maybe how to handle a conflict of interest. Physical therapist assistants shall support organizational behaviors and business practices that benefit patients or clients and society. So there's two different types of conflicts of interest that your text talks about. Episodic conflicts of interest arise from choices that are made voluntarily. For example, giving or accepting personal gifts while on the job. And an episodic conflict of interest is in contrast to a systematic type of conflict of interest. So systematic types of conflict of interests arise from the sheer structure of organizations and symptoms. So within like managed care systems or the POPTS system, physician-owned therapy service systems, okay? So the proper moral response to an episodic conflict of interest is to try to escape for them, to give up the conflicting interest that threatens the role responsibility, to avoid the conflict in the first place, so like Brenda could have avoided the conflict in the first place by not even hiring, pregnant girlfriend Kelly, right? to disclose the conflicts to the appropriate parties. So you see that Patrick tries to handle the conflict of interest by disclosing what had happened. He is not honest, and he says he did it, but he's trying to handle it morally there. And also to take other steps as appropriate. You're going to want to exercise special caution to ensure the responsibility of your role is properly met. So some common areas of concern when we talk about conflicts of interest, I want you to think about patient treatments. What happens if you are asked to treat a family member? Okay. What about reimbursement? How are you going to handle that? Or advising versus providing treatment. So we always want to promote health while we respect a patient's rights. Okay. When is healthcare intervention warranted? And at what level? Who defines the acceptable outcomes? Is it the PT? Is it the professional? Is it the patient? Is it the reimbursement organization? And what is the cost and who pays for it? Okay. All those areas maybe can present potential conflicts of interest or where conflicts of interest may arise. All right. So PT generates systemic conflicts of interest centered on the therapist's dual roles of having to be both the advisor, telling telling the patients coming to the PT kind of going, gosh, what should I do in this situation? But then the PT is also the provider, right? So maybe the therapist might feel like, oh, should I advise them to stay in physical therapy because I'm the provider, right? And professionals always advise clients about the options that they have, help clients decide their best course of action, but then we also have to provide the services, right? Now, equity is defined as the quality of being fair, unbiased, and just. In other words, equity involves ensuring that everyone has access to the resources, opportunities, power, and responsibility that they need to reach their full potential, as well as making changes so that unfair differences may be understood and addressed. Now, equality, in contrast, aims to ensure that everyone gets the same things in order to enjoy full, healthy lives. Like equity, equality aims to promote fairness and justice, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same things. And withholding key information, we have to divulge information about relationships between practitioners so that patients can make informed decisions. So some specific challenges within healthcare systems. So fee-for-service was a traditional type of insurance that actually produces higher costs for the patient, can produce unnecessary tests and procedures, and looks at the provider's self-interest. So fee-for-service is a payment model where services are unbundled and paid for separately. In healthcare, it gives an incentive for physicians to provide more treatment because payment is dependent on the quantity of care rather than the quality. Okay? So there's a temptation to give advice for unnecessary services and then to elevate the billing charges. Okay, so there is an ongoing temptation in all professions that have a fee-for-service reimbursement system to provide unnecessary services in order to increase profits. Now, managed care systems are like Medicare, or having you have to see a doctor that's on our preferred provider list. This is where the money into the system is based on the number of subscribers. There is an incentive in a managed care system to try to reduce referrals and other costly resources. So managed care is a reimbursement system with control of the clients served a specific range of benefits and services available, and they try to control costs. So Medicare is probably the best example I can think of to explain that to you. In your text, you can read through page 108 and page 109, talking about managed care environment. There's also page 108. There's 6 bullet points that talk about managed care structures, and then on page 109, text says that the authors of the text say, overall, in our judgment, the managed care system of recent decades encourages providers to offer a minimum level of care, not at an optimal level. Okay. So physician referrals, page 109 talks about physician referral. So historically, physician referral has been one of the most discussed conflicts of interest in physical therapy. At one time, PTs worked directly under physician supervision in the beginning days of the PT world. And then as PT became more professional, therapist skills more skills were required, and then there was a strong move to break off from being under physician supervision and to provide private therapy, right? So the practice, then they started doing referrals for PT. Okay, so this practice had serious potential for abuse in the early 80s. Like, PT was a highly profitable profession to be in because of physicians were paid for making referrals. Okay, in 1983, APTA forbade that, and yes, we do. Physicians cannot now profit off of referring to physical therapy. The APTA Code of Ethics now forbids PTs from entering into a problematic referral relationship. For example, a physician having a favorite PT they refer to, patients can choose to go anywhere. Okay, so that's what I mean by networking. And now physician-owned therapy services are POPTS. These are technically legal, though they're controversial, and APTA opposes them. Actually, in the module, have a link to an article from WebPT, which explains physician-owned therapy services very well. So take some time to read through that this week, okay? Conflict of interest can arise when, for example, say between equipment and supplies, say like a PT wants to manufacture equipment like orthotics or customizing wheelchairs versus outsourcing them. Want to make sure the charges are balanced both for equipment and labor, and not to be trying to profit of having specialized equipment, quote unquote specialized, that only this PT can provide. Page 111 of your text talks about the conflict of interest that can arise with equipment and supplies. Now, gifts. All right, so also page 111. Now, Principle 7C of the APTA Code of Ethics states, physical therapists, PTA, shall not accept gifts or other considerations that influence or give an appearance of influencing their professional judgment. So what does that mean? Is it forbidden to take gifts at all? Or can we take gifts as long as we don't let them influence our professional judgment? I love the description in your text. Talks about patients wanting to give gifts. And, in some cultures, gifts are given because, it's a custom or it's appreciation, all right? And then to not take that gift would be considered an insult, all right? So here are some guidelines. So first of all, it's not appropriate to take a gift from a supplier or a vendor, okay? If it's going to influence your professional judgment, like, oh yeah, I'll take that gift and now I'm always going to only buy my supplies from you, okay? So, but here's some guidelines, okay? So gifts should be an expression of gratitude, not manipulation or coercion. There should be a minimal monetary value associated with the gift, okay? The Stark Law don't allow gifts of a greater sum value than $300 in a year to physicians. So gifts to patients cannot exceed $10 per gift or more than $50 in any one sum. So keep it at a small monetary value, minimal, okay? And your place that you work might actually have some guidelines on this also. Gifts should not significantly shape relationships with vendors. Gifts should benefit people in need. The cost should never be passed on to patients, and information about gifts should be disclosed to interested parties. You want to look at the gift assessed in relation to the economic situation of the patient rather than its value to the therapist. So say somebody you know that doesn't make very money comes with this very elaborate gift, and you know that that's a huge financial impact for them. Definitely not appropriate to take it. I also have another WebPT article that you can read on gifts. It talks about gifts around the holidays, but I think the principles in there are applicable. Okay, so as a student PTA, now when you are student PTA, you need to know your scope of practice too. But obviously, once you're fully practicing and licensed as PTA, you are responsible to know and practice within the scope of your Practice Act. You also are held to the standards of ethical conduct. Now, some specific responsibilities to consider as a student PTA when you're faced with a potential conflict of interest situation. First of all, as you're working out there in your clinicals, you want to make sure to express any serious doubts that you have about your qualifications for treatment activities, for one thing, especially if you've been given the authority by that person to act independently. Page 113 in your text has a case that outlines an inadequate supervision of a student PT. Okay, and that's where you can see that there's some maybe potential conflict of interest arising because they're asking the student PT to perform treatment and really the student PT, Megan is her name in this case study, should have probably expressed doubts that she had about her qualifications for treatment, okay? Especially if your CI is giving you authority to act independently, all right? You also want to share what you know about a situation or a patient when the effectiveness of the healthcare team depends on the information that you have. You want to refrain from acts that are wrong for anyone to commit. Write any wrongdoings you have committed. You want to address others' wrongdoing constructively. Next week we'll talk about whistleblowing. And you also want to be ready to help identify the best alternatives for patients and others who are faced with difficult situations. Always remain faithful to your own convictions and exercise the will and courage to voice them. Bigger than it sounds, isn't it? Give yourself opportunity to reflect back on your actions and take advantage of your student role right now to refine your ethical decision making under good supervision, hopefully under a good mentor, good CI, okay? As a student, you may not do the right thing because there may be psychological, structural, and knowledge barriers to your acting on what is right, and that's okay, all right? I do want you to know, though, as a student, you're not protected from ethical dilemmas. You're going to find yourself in them, in which you have to weigh out conflicting moral principles, and you have to decide how to act in the specific situation. Okay? All right, gang, have fun with Chapter 8. I can't wait to hear your discussion this week and read through your assignment on this conflict of interest.